Devon, England. January 2019. Commando Training Center, Royal Marines, Limpstone, 6:15 in the morning, and it's still pitch black. The temperature is hovering around 4 degrees Celsius, which sounds manageable until you factor in the horizontal rain coming off the English Channel and the wind chill that turns everything into misery. A bus pulls up to the main gate. Inside are 12 American soldiers, Rangers, Tier 1 operators. Men who have deployed multiple times to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, men who have earned their tabs through blood and grit and sleepless nights in the worst places on earth. They're here for a cultural exchange. That's what the paperwork says. 3 weeks embedded with the Royal Marines Commandos. Learn their methods, share best practices, build interoperability, standard NATO cross-training stuff. But everyone knows the real reason. The Americans want to see what makes British commandos tick. They want to understand the mystique. Because the Royal Marines have a reputation. Not for having the best equipment, not for having the biggest budget, not for having the most firepower. For being absolutely, certifiably, impossible to break. The American team leader is a captain. We'll call him Mitchell. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria, Ranger qualified, Airborne qualified, Mountain Warfare qualified. The kind of resume that makes civilians' jaws drop. He steps off the bus and immediately notices something wrong. No one's there to greet them. The gate guard checks their paperwork, waves them through, points toward a building in the distance. That's your barracks. Training starts at 0700. The captain looks at his watch. That's 45 minutes. No welcome brief. No orientation, no handshakes. Just a pointed finger and a dismissal. One of his sergeants mutters under his breath. Friendly bunch. The captain says nothing, but he's already recalibrating his expectations. What happens over the next 18 days will fundamentally change how these American soldiers understand training, resilience, and what it actually means to build elite warriors. And it starts with a simple misunderstanding that perfectly captures the cultural gap between American and British military philosophy. Stick with me, because this story reveals something profound about how different nations create excellence, and why the American way and the British way produce soldiers who are equally lethal but fundamentally different in how they think about suffering. Let me give you the context, because without it, none of what happens next will make sense. The Royal Marines Commando course is 32 weeks long. 32 weeks. That's 8 months of continuous training before you even earn the Green Beret. For comparison, U.S. Army infantry basic training is 10 weeks. Ranger School is 61 days. Even the famously brutal Marine Corps boot camp is 13 weeks. The Royal Marines take 32. And here's what's crucial to understand. It's not 32 weeks of gradually increasing difficulty. It's 32 weeks of relentless, unending pressure that never lets up, that deliberately breaks you down, not to rebuild you in a different image, but to reveal what you actually are, underneath all the confidence and bravado and self-belief. The Royal Marines have a phrase, it's not about what you can do, it's about what you can endure. American Special Operations training tends to push you to your limits and then teach you to expand those limits. British Commando training pushes you to your limits and then keeps pushing until your limits become meaningless. Until you operate in a zone where your body stopped working properly hours ago but you're still moving, still thinking, still functioning. Not because you found some hidden reserve of strength, but because you accepted that strength doesn't matter anymore. Only will matters. Captain Mitchell didn't know any of this when he stepped off that bus. He knew the Royal Marines were tough. Everyone knows that. But he thought tough meant the same thing everywhere. He was wrong. The American concept of tough is about capacity. How much can you lift? How far can you run? How long can you stay awake? It's measurable, quantifiable. You can put numbers on it. The British concept of tough is about something else entirely. It's about the willingness to continue when continuing serves no logical purpose. When every rational calculation says stop. When your body has given you every possible signal that what you're doing is damaging you. And you continue anyway. Not because you're stupid. Not because you don't feel the pain. But because you've made a decision that transcends physical reality. The first training evolution begins at 0700 on the dot. The Americans are formed up outside their barracks. They're in British-issued PT kit. The instructors appear. 4 of them, corporals and sergeants. Royal Marines, training team. They'd all introduce themselves. They don't explain what's about to happen. One of them simply says, "Follow me," and starts running. The Americans exchange glances. Follow me. No warm-up, no stretching, no safety brief, no explanation of the route, or the distance, or the purpose. Just follow me. They run. The pace is moderate, sustainable. Through the camp, out onto the roads, into the Devon countryside. It's still dark. The rain hasn't stopped. The Americans are settling into the rhythm when the lead instructor suddenly veers off-road into what can only be described as a swamp, waist-deep mud, freezing water. In January, in England. Before breakfast, the Americans hesitate. Just for a second, and that second is noticed. The instructor doesn't stop, doesn't wait, doesn't explain. The Americans plunge in after him. 20 minutes later, they're still in the swamp. Not running through it, running in it. Circles. Back and forth, the mud sucking at their legs, the cold seeping into their bones. No explanation of when it will end or why they're doing it. Just movement, continuous, purposeless, miserable movement. One of the American sergeants, a man who has completed Ranger School, who has survived SEER training, who considers himself essentially unbreakable, starts to feel something he hasn't felt since he was a private. Confusion, because this doesn't make sense. There's no objective, no goal, no metric to hit that would end the suffering. In American training, there's always a goal. Complete this many repetitions, cover this distance, endure for this duration. You know what you're aiming for? You can pace yourself. You can manage your resources because you understand the parameters. Here, there are no parameters. The training evolution ends when it ends, not when you've achieved something, but when the instructor decides it ends. The psychological difference is profound. American training teaches you to dig deep and find more. British training teaches you to stop expecting things to end. 3 hours later, they're done with the swamp, soaked, frozen, covered in mud that's somehow gotten inside every piece of clothing they're wearing. They're expecting a break, a chance to change, maybe some food. The instructor points at an obstacle course in the distance. That's the bottom field. Standard morning warm-up? Let's go. The Americans stare. Morning warm-up. It's 10 o'clock. They've been going for 3 hours. They haven't eaten. They're hypothermic. One of them starts to say something. Sergeant, we haven't had any. The instructor is already walking. The American stops mid-sentence, looks at his captain. Mitchell's face is unreadable. He starts moving toward the obstacle course. The rest follow. The bottom field is legendary in Commando training. It's designed to be completed while you're already exhausted, already cold, already at the end of what you think you can handle, because that's when real training begins. The obstacles aren't technically difficult. Walls, ropes, tunnels, balance beams over, water, nothing that requires exceptional athletic ability. What they require is the willingness to keep going when your body is screaming at you to stop. The Americans attack it like rangers, attack everything. Fast, aggressive, competitive. They're racing each other, pushing hard, treating it like a test to be conquered. The British instructors watch without expression. The Americans finish. They're gasping, exhausted, but proud. They beat the course. They look at the instructors, expecting acknowledgement, not the again. They blink. What? The course? Again. Captain Mitchell straightens. Sergeant, we just completed. I know. Again. This time slower, controlled, deliberate. And again, after that, we're not timing you. We're teaching you. That's when Mitchell starts to understand. This isn't about performance. This isn't about proving what you can do. This is about learning to exist in a state of continuous discomfort without any expectation that it will end. The Americans go through the bottom field 4 more times that morning. By the end, they're not racing, they're not competing. They're just moving. Steadily, mechanically. Every ounce of ego has been beaten out of them by the sheer repetitive misery of doing the same thing over and over with no reward, no acknowledgement, no endpoint. The differences crystallize over the next several days. American military training, even the hardest programs, operates on a principle of measurable progression. You start at point A, you work toward point B. There are evaluations, benchmarks, metrics. You know where you stand. You know what you need to achieve. This is motivating. It gives you targets, goals, something to aim for. It also means you're always managing yourself relative to those targets. Pacing, conserving, calculating. British Commando training deliberately removes all of that. You don't know what's coming next. You don't know how long it will last. You don't know if what you're doing matters or it's just designed to make you suffer. You can't pace yourself because you have no idea what you're pacing for. This creates a completely different mental state. In American training, you're always thinking forward, planning, strategizing. In British training, you exist only in the present moment because the future is unknowable and the past is irrelevant. All that matters is right now. This step, this breath, this obstacle. The Americans struggle with this more than anything physical. They're trained planners. They're trained to assess, decide, act. They're trained to be in control of their situation. Here, they control nothing. The schedule is unknown. The expectations are unclear. The rules seem arbitrary. Why are they doing this specific exercise? Unknown. When will it end? Unknown. What's the point? Unknown. Just do it. Keep doing it. Don't stop until you're told. For men who have built their identities on competence and control, this is profoundly disorienting. And that's exactly the point. Day 7. The Americans are taken to Woodbury Common. It's a training area the Royal Marines have used for decades. Rough terrain heathland, gorse bushes that tear at your skin. and at the center of it, the endurance course. 6 miles of hell. That's the official description. 6 miles through tunnels, streams, bogs, underwater passages, and obstacles designed by people who apparently hate human beings. The Americans have heard about this. It's famous, or infamous. The tunnels alone are the stuff of nightmares. Concrete, pipes, partially filled with water, extending underground for what feels like forever. Pitch black. So narrow you can barely move your arms. Completely submerged sections where you have to push through underwater, not knowing how far you have to go before you can breathe again. Claustrophobia doesn't begin to describe it. One of the American sergeants, a man named Torres, has a problem with enclosed spaces. Not a phobia. He manages it. But enclosed spaces are not his friend. He's done confined space training. He's passed every evaluation. But he's never done anything like this. The instructor explains the course. Briefly, start there. You in there? Keep moving. Don't stop in the tunnels. If you stop, you block everyone behind you. You'll be cold. You'll be wet. You'll want to quit. Don't. Torres feels his chest tightening. The instructor notices. He doesn't say anything reassuring. He doesn't offer an alternative. He just looks at Torres with an expression that says, I see you, and you're going to do this anyway. They enter the first tunnel. It's exactly as bad as Torres imagined. Worse. The water is January cold, which means it's barely above freezing. The darkness is absolute. The walls press in on every side. He can hear the man in front of him splashing, grunting. He can feel the man behind him pushing at his boots. Keep moving. Don't stop. He keeps moving. The first underwater section comes faster than he expected. One moment, he's crawling through water up to his chest. The next moment, the ceiling drops and he's underwater, pulling himself through the pipe. No idea how far it extends. No idea if there's a pocket of air ahead or if he misjudged his breath, and this is how it ends. He's not thinking about being tough. He's not thinking about the mission. He's not thinking about anything except the next pull of his arms, the next desperate need for air. He emerges, gasps, keeps moving. An hour later, it's over. Torres climbs. Out of the final obstacle, he's shaking uncontrollably. Not from cold, though he's hypothermic. From something else. A kind of release. He's never experienced anything like it. He looks at Captain Mitchell. The captain is staring at nothing. Water streaming down his face. And Torres realizes that Mitchell went somewhere too. Somewhere deep? Somewhere he's never been? The British instructor appears. Gentlemen, that was the warm-up version. Next week, you'll do it carrying full kit with weight. After a night march, after 12 hours without food, Torres actually laughs. It's not a happy laugh. It's the laugh of a man who has just realized he understands absolutely nothing about what these people consider normal. Let me explain why this matters, because it's not just about who has the harder training, it's about what you're optimizing for. The U.S. military, particularly elite units, optimizes for capability, physical capacity, technical skill, tactical proficiency. The question American training asks is, can this person perform at a high level? The measures are objective. Timed runs. Scored evaluations. Pass-fail gates? You know if someone meets the standard because the standard is defined. British Commando training asks a different question. Will this person continue when continuing? Makes no sense. The measure is not capability, it's character. Revealed not through performance tests, but through prolonged, deliberate, seemingly pointless suffering. The American philosophy produces soldiers who are incredibly capable within their sphere of training, who have been taught to push their limits and expand what they can do, who believe, fundamentally, that there are no problems too big if you're skilled enough and tough enough. The British philosophy produces soldiers who are incredibly resilient beyond any reasonable expectation, who have been taught that their limits are irrelevant, who believe, fundamentally, that capability matters less than the willingness to continue. Neither philosophy is wrong. They're different answers to different questions. Americans ask, what can you do? Brett asks, who are you when you can't do anything? The 12 American soldiers are discovering, painfully, that they've never had to answer that second question. Their entire training, their entire career, has been built around increasing their capability, being better, being stronger, being faster. They've never been forced to exist in a state of pure, prolonged, purposeless suffering, with no expectation of it ending and no goal to achieve that would make it stop. It's breaking them, not physically. Physically, they're among the most capable soldiers in the world. It's breaking something in their minds. Their sense of control, their sense of competence, their sense of understanding what's happening and why. Day 12, the 30-miler. 30 miles across Dartmoor, carrying full equipment in 8 hours. This is the final test of commando training, the evolution that earns the Green Beret. The Americans are here as observers. They're not attempting the full course, but they've been invited to accompany a commando training troop for the first 15 miles to experience the approach. It starts at 4 in the morning. In darkness, in fog so thick you can barely see the man in front of you. The Americans are carrying about 50 pounds each. The commando recruits are carrying more. The pace is brutal. Not quite running, but not walking either. A speed march that covers ground relentlessly, chewing through miles regardless of terrain or conditions. 2 hours in, the Americans are suffering. The blisters have turned to raw, bleeding wounds. The pack straps are cutting into shoulders. The fog has turned to freezing rain. The terrain is rocks and bogs, an ankle-turning nightmare. At the 4-hour mark, one of the American sergeants, a man who has never quit anything in his life, approaches Captain Mitchell. "Sir, I can't feel my feet anymore." Mitchell looks at him. "Neither can I keep moving." The sergeant hesitates. This is when, in American training, you'd make a risk assessment, check for serious injury, determine if continuing poses unacceptable danger. The sergeant waits for that. Assessa Mitchell keeps walking. The sergeant falls back in line. They reach the 15-mile point. The Americans are done. They can observe the rest, but their participation ends here. The commando recruits keep going. 15 more miles. Mitchell watches them disappear into the fog. Men who have already been awake for 20 hours, who have already covered 15 miles of brutal terrain, who have another 15 to go and will finish or fail trying. He turns to the British instructor who has been accompanying them. How many of them will make it? The instructor shrugs. Most they've gotten this far, but some won't. Some will discover today that they don't have it, that they've been pretending, even to themselves. And today, the pretense ends. The American captain is quiet for a long moment. Then he asks the question that has been building in him for 12 days. What are you actually looking for? Not performance, not capability. What are you actually selecting for? The British instructor considers this. Someone who will continue when there's no reason to continue. Someone who will function when functioning is impossible. Someone who has genuinely, completely accepted that their comfort doesn't matter. Their desires don't matter. Their limits don't matter. Only the mission matters. We can teach skills. We can build capability. We can't teach that. We can only reveal whether someone has it. And the only way to reveal it is to create conditions so miserable, so prolonged, so utterly without reward or endpoint, that the only people still standing are the ones who simply refuse to stop. Not because they're tougher, not because they're stronger, because they've made a decision at some deep level that transcending their own suffering is just what they do. It's who they are. The Americans return to their base after 18 days. They've lost an average of 12 pounds each. They're carrying injuries that will take weeks to heal. And they're different. Not in ways you can measure on a fitness test or a skills evaluation. Different in how they understand suffering, in how they understand themselves. Captain Mitchell writes an after-action report. It's classified, but the essence of it has become part of Army institutional knowledge. He writes that British commando training is not harder than American training. It's different. The difference isn't about physical demands. American schools have comparable physical challenges. The difference is philosophical. For American training, asks what you can do and teaches you to do more. British training asks who you are and forces you to confront the answer. He writes that the experience was humbling. That Rangers, men who consider themselves elite, discovered they had never truly been tested in the British way. That there were depths of endurance they had never been forced to access because American training, for all its brutality, still operates within a framework of knowable parameters and achievable goals. The British had removed all parameters, all goals, and forced them to continue anyway. He recommends elements of the British approach be studied for integration into American training. But he also notes, and this is crucial, that wholesale adoption is impossible. Because British training works within a British context. British unit sizes, British deployment patterns, British logistics, British tactical doctrine. You cannot simply transplant one nation's training philosophy into another nation's military, any more than you can transplant one nation's combat doctrine into another nation's tactics. The systems are interconnected. Training produces soldiers for a specific purpose within a specific operational framework. Change the training without changing everything else. And you create soldiers who don't fit the machine they're supposed to operate in. This is the lesson, and it echoes something crucial about how militaries actually work. The Royal Marines produce brilliant commandos for Royal Marines operations, small unit actions, amphibious operations, expeditionary missions, where resilience and adaptability matter more than overwhelming firepower. The U.S. Army produces brilliant soldiers for U.S. Army operations, large-scale combined arms maneuver, massive logistical operations, sustained high-intensity conflict where capability and capacity matter more than individual suffering tolerance. the British approach wouldn't work for the American mission. You can't build an army of 2 million soldiers using a training program that takes 32 weeks per person and deliberately breaks 90% of candidates. You wouldn't have enough soldiers, and the soldiers you had would be selected for qualities that matter less in American-style operations than the qualities American training selects for. Similarly, the American approach wouldn't work for the British mission. You can't build Royal Marines using a training program that prioritizes capability metrics over character revelation. You'd get soldiers who are technically excellent but haven't been tested in the specific way that British operations require. Neither approach is wrong. They're different tools for different jobs. The Americans came to Limpstone thinking they would experience something harder. What they experienced was something different. And in that difference, they learned more about themselves and their own training philosophy than they could have learned any other way. Subscribe now, because what I'm about to tell you explains why this matters for anyone who thinks about excellence, performance, and what it actually means to develop people for difficult challenges. The distinction between capability-based and character-based selection has implications far beyond military training. And in the next video, I'm going to break down how these two approaches play out in contexts you might not expect. From special operations selection to corporate leadership development to elite athletic training, the principles are universal even when the applications differ. The American Rangers left to Limpstone with respect. Deep, genuine, earned respect for a different way of building warriors. They didn't leave thinking the British way was better. They left thinking the British way was brilliant for the British purpose. And they returned home to continue training in the American way, because the American way is brilliant for the American purpose, but they carried something with them, a seed of understanding. That their own training, for all its intensity, had never quite pushed them into that zone of pure, purposeless, and that somewhere in their future, they might face a situation where their capability runs out, where their skills become irrelevant, where the only thing left is the willingness to continue when continuing makes no sense. And now, because of 8 days in Devon, they know that zone exists. They've touched its edges. They understand that being elite isn't just about what you can do. It's about what you can endure when what you can do isn't enough. That's what the British taught them, not how to be tougher, how to think differently about what toughness means. The Royal Marines don't create harder soldiers. They create soldiers who have answered a different question. And the Americans, for the first time, understood that the question they'd been answering their whole careers wasn't the only question worth asking. If you found this breakdown valuable, if you want to understand military training, doctrine, and philosophy at a level that goes beyond surface comparisons, subscribe now. Coming up next, we're examining why Delta Force operators voluntarily attend British SAS selection, what they learn that they can't learn anywhere in the American system, and why the relationship between American and British special operations is built on mutual respect rather than competition. You absolutely don't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.